Hey, what's going on, guys? I'm Ty Donnelly from riskengineeringmusic.com. Thank you for tuning in again. And today, we're having some fun. We're not talking about anything too crazy or too serious or too in-depth. We're just having some good old fun, and we're talking about microphones. And we're not talking about any microphones, we're talking about the creme de la creme, the best of the best microphones. And yes, these are going to be probably well out of reach for most people, myself definitely included. But again, that's not the point of this. The point is just to have some fun and talk about some of the best mics that money can buy. So let's jump right into it. Alright, so we're going to talk about 5 high-end microphones in no specific order. I'm just going to start shooting them off, telling you what I like about them, because these are microphones that I have used in the past. They're not microphones that I own. Let's get that out of the way right off the bat. Maybe one day for you guys too. Let's all hope so. But let's just jump right into it. So the first mic I want to talk about is the Telefunken U47. I've used this a couple times. The most recent was still a good while back, about a few years ago. When I was in the studio with Wonder Girl, the producer, and Thoroughbred, who's an artist from Toronto. If you're from Toronto, I'm sure you know him. If you're not from Toronto, check his music out. He's awesome. Now, the U47 has been around for around 60 plus years now, so it goes back quite some time. It sounds great on a lot of different things. Every time that I've used it on vocals, and I found that this mic gives a really nice kind of mid bump. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but every time I've used it on an artist where I felt like they needed a bit of that mid-range kind of boost. I wouldn't say it's the brightest mic in the world. I'd say it tends to kind of gear towards more low and mid-rangey kind of tones. So if you're looking for a super bright microphone, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this. There's other options for that. But if you're looking for that nice, classic, smooth, mid-range, this is a great mic to go with. And I should mention that this mic comes in at around $15,000 Canadian. So again, it's a lot of money, but great microphone. Now, next up, we have a microphone I'm sure all you guys have heard of before or seen somewhere. We're talking about the Sony C800G. Now, this is a tube condenser microphone, and it's probably the more well-known high-end microphone that gets used quite often. And this microphone comes in at around $20,000 Canadian, which is a hefty chunk of money for a microphone. It's insane to me to think about, but hey, if you got it, why not? Now, this microphone can be hit or miss for me when I've used it in the past on artists. There's times where I've said like, yeah, if a studio has a C800, let's just use it. And then we try it on the artist and it's like, why does that not sound good? And it's because this microphone has a significant high-end boost, I think at around 10K, I believe. So it makes things very bright. So if somebody comes in and they've got kind of a natural lower kind of tone voice and there's not much high-end in their voice to begin with, I find that slapping the C800 on it can sound weird because you're almost just exaggerating this low mid kind of tone in that person's voice, and it brings up kind of unwanted frequencies that personally I'm not a huge fan of. I like this mic more so on singers with a more mid to high range voice because it just kind of complements it even more. So you've got to be careful with this mic. Just because it's expensive and it does sound good, it doesn't mean it's right for every voice. So that's something to think about when it comes to the Sony C800. And again, at $20,000, this is a very expensive mic, but it can sound great and it can sound bad at the same time, so you've got to be careful. Next up, if we're talking high-end microphones, we can't leave out Neumann. And which Neumann am I going to go with this one? I'm going to go with the U67. I love the U67. It's such a classic microphone. I believe this was introduced in the early 60s, and it was used on a lot of modern pop music back then, and to this day, it still is. Over the years, it's kind of just held its rep for that. It's kind of a step up from the U87. I think a lot of us are familiar with an 87, but this is kind of like the father to the U87. It's got a nice mid-rangey kind of presence. The high end is polished, but it's not overly bright, I find. It's just a good overall microphone for kind of any voice or any application, to be totally honest. Now, I've used this mic a bunch on people in studios when I'm hired at different studios around Toronto or wherever I've been in the world. And if they have a 67 and they've got a U87, I know people are going to sound good on that 87, but they're just going to sound a little bit better on the 67. So Fantastic microphone, and this comes in at around, I believe, $10,000 to $11,000 Canadian. Awesome microphone. Now this next mic, I will admit, I've only used once, and it was only for a short period of time when we were just kind of testing different microphones that we wanted to use for an artist that I was in the studio with. Now we're talking about the AKG C12. Now this mic comes in at around $10,000 Canadian, and again, I don't have a ton of experience with it, but from the short amount of time that I was using it, it sounded incredible. It was just a good all-around sound. It's a vacuum tube microphone. It sounded really, really solid. So I can't give a ton of information on this one, but just know that it is a great microphone. Now, finally, I had to save my favorite for last. To me, this is the GOAT of all microphones. If I could choose any mic to have in the entire world, it would be this one. I think you guys already know what I'm gonna say. It is the Telefunken Elam 251E. What even needs to be said about this? It's so incredible, I can't even explain it. I've had the pleasure of using this a few times with artists in the studio. When it is available, if it is at a studio, there's 100% chance I'm using it. Doesn't even matter who the vocalist is, I'm using this microphone and it's going to sound good. I can guarantee it. It's one of those mics that you can just kind of slap on anyone, whether they've got a low voice, a mid-rangey voice, or they tend to be a little more on the high end. Trust me, it's probably going to work. There's something about this microphone that it gives like a low end presence, but not a muddy low end presence. It's just got this nice like lift on the low end that you just get this body from. That's just insane. The mid-range is silky smooth, and the high end it's present, but it's not sharp. Like I said before, with the C800, I find sometimes on certain people, it can be a little harsh or sharp sounding. With the 251, it's just silky smooth. The high end is just insane. It's just a pleasure to actually use that recording to mix afterwards, because there's not a whole lot you need to do. And especially when you're in a studio that has that, chances are they have a good preamp, good compressor, that kind of thing. So when you pair it with other good gear, it's just insane. It's any engineer's dream to work with this microphone, whether you're recording somebody in the studio or whether you get something recorded and you're mixing it. It just makes things an absolute dream. So this is my all-time favorite microphone. Hey, if I can get my hands on one of these one day, I will be a very happy man. So that concludes the top 5 high-end microphones that are some of my favorite out there. Do you guys have any favorites that I left out? Leave a comment, let me know. Or if you've used any of the microphones that I've mentioned, let me know what you think about them. Did I get this right? Let's talk about it. Take care, guys.